Anyone who's a parent or spends time around kids knows how naturally and intensely children ask religious questions. And their innate inclination is also apparent to ask why about every aspect of life. In spite of this, the spiritual life of children has received relatively little attention from developmental psychologists and educators. Our speakers tonight will address this missing dimension in childhood psychology, as well as apply it to, beyond that, to all areas of life and society. In different ways, their work has verified that all adolescents confront a spiritual quest in their lives during their teen years that will leave a mark on their personal identity and mental health throughout their lives, and that parents and teachers have a responsibility to help young people resolve the issues that they face as they travel this path. Anyone who cares about young people and the future of our society would be very interested in what they have to say about this topic tonight. First, we have Lisa Miller, who is Professor of Psychology and Education and Director of the Clinical Psychology Program at Columbia University Teachers College, and is the founder of the Spirituality Mind-Body Institute, the first Ivy League graduate program in spirituality and psychology. A graduate of Yale, she received her doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania, studying with Dr. Martin Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology, right? Yeah. Her innovative research is focused on quantifiable effects of spirituality in health, resilience, and human thriving. Her clinical and consulting work focuses on spiritual awareness and spiritual growth for individuals, families, groups, and organizations. Dr. Miller is most recently the author of the groundbreaking book, The Spiritual Child, The New Science of Parenting for Health and Lifelong Thriving. She is frequently cited in print and online media and has appeared on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, the NBC Today Show, and other media. Dr. Holly Peterson is the U.S. Director of Communication for Communion Liberation, an international movement in the Catholic Church, founded in 1994 in Italy by the servant of God, Monsignor Luigi Giussani. She holds a master's in religious education and a doctorate in educational administration, and wrote her dissertation on the educational methodology of Monsignor Giussani as applied to the American context, the only work of its kind in the field. Dr. Peterson's approach to education is rooted in her 25 years teaching religious studies at Christian Brothers High School in Sacramento. She's also an adjunct professor in the School of Education at the University of San Francisco. Without further ado, we'll begin with Professor Miller.
Hello, thank you for coming this evening. And thank you for this lovely invitation. It's an honor to be here. When I started out as a clinical psychologist and clinical scientist in 1996, there was not one single peer-reviewed scientific article on spiritual life in children as a source of resilience and thriving. American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, American Journal of Psychiatry, the scientific journals that define what is good practice and what you can do as a therapist were completely silent on spiritual life. And yet I could see every day, plain as day, as a therapist, that those children who came in with some direct relationship with their higher power, whether they said God, Allah, Hashem, Jesus, whatever their faith tradition might be, those children who had a personal, living relationship, a transcendent relationship, had an entirely different course of recovery, traveling through the darkness of the tunnel out through the other side, and particularly if that was shared in some form of community or family. So I set to work, and over the past 15, 20 years, my lab and fellow labs around the country have developed a body of science which now makes a very strong case for the place of spirituality in health and wellness in young people. Now, all the while that I was working, I had a very dear colleague, Sunya Luther, at Columbia, working down the hall. And she looked not at children in poverty, but rather at children in very resourced communities. And what she actually found was rates of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse amongst well-resourced high schools, Marin County out in California, Fairfield County in Connecticut, rates of suffering greater than those found in the inner city. When she looked under the hood at what might be the source, she found two things. The first was the experience by the child of being parented with contingent love. So at pickup, almost, how's the soccer game? Did you win? How'd that math test go? Well-meaning, loving parents were asking questions and guiding attention around outcome, rather than, I'm so glad to see you. You are a radiant beam of light. Pure love. The second thing she found was that there was an implicit, often silent, and we know where there's silence, there's action, a silent social ecology throughout the high schools, which she identified through asking teens about popularity. She'd pull over some teens and say, tell me, who's popular here? Everyone knew, oh, they're popular, those girls over there and that fellow. She'd come back the next week, pull over some fresh kids and say, tell me about those girls over there and that boy over there. And in this way, found the true lived correlates of popularity, of social esteem, the implicit rules that govern social interaction. What might you imagine was the number one correlate of esteem and popularity amongst girls in well-resourced high schools? Looks. It's in that ballpark. Clothing, very close. Outgoing. Body. It was weight. The number one correlate for popularity in girls in well-resourced communities is weight. Now, if you ask someone, tell me what makes you popular, there's not a narrative. It's the actual lived behavior. Again, what's not spoken is where the action is. The number one correlate for boys?
Sports.
Sports, strength.
I'm going to say body again.
Body. The number one correlate of lived behavior for boys with popularity was substance use. Substance use. So this is the social ecology de facto surrounding teens. Let me throw this here. And within this cultural tidal wave, we can enter what now is a very strong body of science. Now hundreds of articles in the past 15 to 20 years have been written showing 4 major findings about spirituality in youth. The first is if I were to ask you about the children you know and love, and if you might find them in your heart to be spiritual, what might come to mind? Just about every parent says, yes, children are so spiritual. That direct knowing, the knowing of our heart, is indeed mirrored by science. If we look at twin studies, which look at twins raised together, twins raised apart, and look at their degree of similarity as a factor of their shared genetic material, we see that there is indeed an innate, is this visually?
It's hard to read.
It's hard to read? There is indeed an inborn faculty through which we experience the loving, transcendent relationship. This is our natural spirituality. Now, just to be extremely clear, innate spirituality exists in every single being born on earth. Every child is born a spiritual child. That is in our innate birthright. If we look at how that is expressed, we see that for about 66% of people in the United States, innate spirituality is expressed through a faith tradition. About 2/3 of people in our country give language and practice and understanding and values and community to their natural spirituality through their faith tradition. About 30% of millennials, and with each decade slightly fewer, of people in this country say I'm spiritual, but not religious. So it's quite interesting that of those folks, 2/3 of people still experience a personal God. There is a small number of people who say I'm religious, but not spiritual. For me, religion is about my people, my culture, my community. So there is in fact an overlapping relationship between our innate spirituality, our birthright in every single one of us, and the embrace of a faith tradition. What else does science tell us? That is all in finding 1. Finding 2, looking across the body of science, is that this natural spirituality, which is ours, has periods in our life of surge. And the first one, where it is most apparent, is with puberty. Biological puberty triggers an awakening, a profound spiritual awakening, whether or not the adolescent is expecting this experience or not. Most cultures on earth have factored this in. Certainly in our faith traditions, bar and bat mitzvah, confirmation. There's a number of faith traditions that embrace a deepening of spiritual awareness side by side coming of age. When this is supported, and it can be, spirituality becomes the hub of all other lines of development: moral, social reasoning, the map of reality. This is the core. This is command central when it is supported. There's a natural organization through which it is the highest executive level of functioning. Everything else falls under it, if it is supported. And when it is, science now shows that a personal spiritual relationship with the higher power is more protective against suffering than anything known to the clinical or medical sciences. What does that sound like? I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. When I have a decision to make, I ask, what really would God want me to do? Nature is a spiritual place for me. Friendships are spiritual events. Daily lived spiritual life is more protective against the most prevalent forms of suffering than any of the variables commonly discussed from a materialist point of view. First finding, Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. We published in a nationally representative sample of teens, but those teens who say, yes, it is very much the case that I ask God questions and get an answer. Yes, I have a close personal relationship with Jesus. Yes, nature is my home, my cathedral. I go to nature and feel a oneness with all life and creation. That teen is 40% less likely to become substance dependent than a teen who's sort of the average in this regard, and 80% less likely than a teen who says that doesn't speak to me. Girls who have that strong personal transcendent relationship are 70% less likely to have dangerous or unwanted relations. It is staggering in the clinical sciences to see protective effects of this magnitude. But normally everyone's jumping up and down if you can reduce something by 5%. Now, if by senior year that spiritual hub has been established, it is a setup for life. That personal relationship becomes the cornerstone throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. It is there for us. Our birthright has been cultivated into an understanding, a map of reality, a felt sense of daily spiritual life. We found that it correlates with longevity, fewer depressive episodes, recovery from medical illness, and community of contribution, lives of service. We've also found that it's associated with forgiveness, forbearance, endurance of our relationships. Life looks different on the outside, and life looks different on the inside. These are brains of people my age who for 20 years have sustained that strong personal spirituality of which we speak, within or without of a faith tradition, across faith traditions, a deep transcendent relationship. The areas represented in red, we published this in JAMA Psychiatry in 2014. These broad and pervasive areas represented in red are areas of cortical thickness. The cortex is a processing power. Thick cortex is associated with higher IQ, thinner cortex with Alzheimer's. Broad and pervasive regions of thicker cortex were found in people who said, yes, spiritual life is very important to me. I have a daily relationship with God, with higher power, whatever language is in their tradition. Those broad regions overlap 85% with the same regions in which cortical thickness was found in sustained meditators of non-Judeo-Christian origin, suggesting that a lived transcendent relationship is in our wiring and is cross-cultural. Now, what does this cross-cultural spirituality look like? We ran a study on 7,000 people in India, China, and the United States, and we're now looking in Iran and in Brazil. And what we found is that all around the world, natural spirituality, this heritable contribution to who we are, takes 5 expressions, time and time again, at least 5, which appear to be spiritual phenotypes, expressions of innate spirituality. 1, a sense of interconnectedness or oneness, an awareness that what you do right now in this room affects everyone around you, but it also affects people outside this room. Physical interconnectedness, but also energetic or spiritual interconnectedness. Everyone gets that. And they get it equally whether or not they're part of a faith tradition or not, irrespective of what faith tradition they're part of. And all around the world, this sense of oneness or interconnectedness is found whether or not explicit expression of religion is legal. So even where you are not allowed legally to stand in the middle of town square and speak of your faith, these 5 phenotypes are found. And for the moment, we're talking about interconnectedness. Love. Love as a phenotype, not merely as an emotion like happiness or feeling good, but love as an ultimate paradigm, love as a mutative force. Love changes the world. People treat love as a higher order mutative force, like gravity or magnetism. Love changes things. Everyone gets that. Altruism, a practice of connection, prayer, meditation, and the examined life. Everywhere around the world, the more educated we become, the more spiritually aware we become throughout all 5 of these phenotypes, except in the United States. This is the only country we've looked at where years of education shut down natural spiritual awareness. And there may be a pervasive secular materialism, again, where things are not said, they're very potent, a pervasive secular materialism that shuts down innate spirituality. So that the individuation work of the adolescent becomes far more difficult within the cultural tidal wave identified by Senior Luther. And we have an extraordinary opportunity to not simply show up, but to get ahead of the game, to anticipate the narrow materialism that shapes the education of teens, and meet them where they are so that they can fortify their natural spiritual hub. This is life with and without a spiritual core, right alongside the core tasks of adolescence. Excuse me. Here we go. This is the hard work of the 2nd decade. Who am I? What is my meaning and purpose? What is my work? What are relationships about? And life with a spiritual core says, well, what are relationships about? I am here to encourage you. I am here to love you. And when things don't go right, well, I'm here to forgive you. Okay? Who am I? Well, life without a spiritual core, mainstream, implicit socialization says, who are you? I am an athlete. I am good at math. I am popular or not popular, right? I am a basket of traits. I am a bag of parts. And the problem with being a bag of parts, whether it's that I'm the thinnest or not the thinnest, amongst the litmus test of popularity for girls, is that the day things don't go well, there's not much to me. And who are you? Well, you must be a bag of parts too. So our relationship is really one of an implicit market relationship. What can you do for me? And how great are your parts vis-a-vis mine? The alternative to being a bag of parts is to know ourselves as teens, as a soul on earth, as a being of ultimate worth, as made of life itself, whatever language might be ours. To know ourselves as a soul on earth is to know you as a soul on earth. And what is it then? Am I being good at math? Well, that's not who I am, being good at math. That is my endowment through which to serve God, the higher purpose, honor my family. My traits are endowments through which to serve, rather than being of my ultimate worth. And this view leads, as the roots, to a flowering tree of what might be called the character strengths and virtues. Right? When we looked at those character traits and virtues, which, yes, buoy us up and lead to a better life, those character strengths and virtues that give us traction in the world to make an outward contribution, we found that the character strengths and virtues of optimism, grit, persistence, those of which people so commonly speak, actually do not sort independently across kids. You don't see, oh, she's full of grit, and boy, that boy has such optimism. But rather you see that they go hand in hand. And if I might invite you to look from here over, the very same blue child with lots of optimism is the very same blue child with lots of grit. And down here, the very same red child who we, in this room, love just as much, the very same red child low in grit is low in optimism. So you see that we really are looking at somewhat parallel lines. Very, very rarely do they cross. So how can I help my red child move up to look like this green, purple, or blue child? How can I help, knowing what we now know, the outward flourishing of our children? And it turns out that for 86% of children, all of these character strengths and virtues, which go hand in hand, are actually rooted more fundamentally in a daily spiritual awareness. I turn to God for guidance in times of difficulty. Nature is a spiritual place for me. So most children are as able to maintain grit and persistence and optimism as they are personally connected to their higher power. There is an exception for 15% of teens and 20% of adults. We see relatively high levels of character strength and virtue, and not so much spiritual connection. Those are the virtuous humanists, and they're invited into the discussion. But 15% is a lot smaller than 99%, as might be represented in our educational culture. And the vast majority of teens, spirituality is the bedrock for thriving. Am I out of time? How am I doing? We're okay? So, knowing this scientifically, how do we position ourselves into the cultural wave? Well, in the first decade, there are expressions of innate spirituality which science has shown time and time again. A spiritual compass. Every child knows right from wrong. It may be irresistible at times, and they may not follow right from wrong, but they know it. We are born with this natural knowing. My oldest child, Isaiah, when the new baby came home, was so excited. New baby, new baby. He was 3 years old, and he brought out all his best toys for the new baby. And there she lay in her bouncy chair, and he piled the blanket, he piled, his balls, and then on top was Thomas, the train. And after about 40 minutes of celebrating the new baby, he went back over, and he lifted Thomas above the baby, and then he looked at me, long and hard. His compass was clear. And then he nonetheless deployed Thomas. But he knew, and that look, right? Children love prayer. I spoke with a woman who teaches Sufi prayer, and she said the children sit right down and start to sway. Teaching a child Sufi prayer is as natural as picking up food for the first time. It's simply in their nature. Relationships with all living beings. I started to tell you about Isaiah when he was about 18 months. We were in the park, and he found some peers who were yellow fluffy geese. He went over enthusiastically and wanted to play with the yellow fluffy geese. And as he started robustly, Mama Goose was worried. So she turned whoosh, and hissed. And when she hissed, she was not hissing at Isaiah. She had turned all that way to hiss at me. Because I had broken the universal role of parenting, which is to watch over our children to the protection of someone else's. In the same way, if you're in the park and a little kid hauls off and hits your child, you don't look at that child. You say, who's watching this child? Right? So all living beings are in relationship, and the child knows that. Isaiah's delight to play with the yellow fluffy geese the natural response of Mama Goose. Children know this, and we can support their natural knowing. There's a little trick that gets into children's books that can sometimes attenuate this knowing, which is the as-if quality. And if we watch and guard against as-ifing this relationship, if we treat the relationship as the child does, as real, and that love is real, the child can sustain authentic relationships with fellow living beings. If you put a dog in an MRI, this was done at Emory, the dog has the same neural correlates as do we. Family is a spiritual event. You can hear this loud and clear. Who will be there? Is everybody going? And so too the classroom is a spiritual place. Allison was not there today. Apparently she does not feel well. There are days where I confess I don't know who was at work and who wasn't, but the child's does. Right? The wholeness is sacred, and everyone counts. The child comfortably engages life and death. Studies have shown that there's an implicit spiritual cognition in every child for continuity of spirit, continuity of consciousness. And it's only if socialized to the contrary that the child doesn't see continuity of spirit after death. So Isaiah was at Pop-Pop's funeral. Pop-Pop was his great-grandfather. And in my tradition, you sit graveside, right by the graveside, and all the adults shovel earth and put it right on the casket. The notion is that you get it through your very being, that the person has passed. And there was little Isaiah, graveside, and he took a little garden spade and put a little garden spade full of earth on Pop-Pop's casket. He said, look, the body goes back to the good earth and the soul goes to God. And I said, yes, Isaiah. The child is a knower. Every child is a knower. 2 weeks later, we're out in the garden. Mama, look. Mama, come now. Race over, and there's a turkey carcass. He says, Mama, the body goes back to the good earth. The soul goes to God. And his eyes were sparkling because he'd seen into a core bedrock spiritual reality. He was illuminated by the spiritual presence of knowing this truth. Now, death in our culture is very often played as traumatizing. And while only you know as a parent what is right for your child, it is for many children illuminating and meaningful to be part of the edges of life and death. New baby and Pop-Pop's passing. It was not traumatizing that day, and Isaiah to this day remembers doing something for Pop-Pop, which was meaningful. Children love good work, and children come to us excited and fascinated and full of joy when they have dreams and mystical experiences. So I have for years been on the governing board of the American Psychological Association, and I can tell you that fellow leaders in my organization have walked me at conferences way over here to the corner at a meeting and said, I've got to tell you about something that happened to me. And what goes on is a beautiful sharing of a profound mystical experience. A time that someone who they loved passed and came to them, a time that a grandparent stood over them, a time that they became one with the universe, and a time when they felt the presence of Mary, the time they felt the presence of God. A life-changing mystical experience. And when I say, when did this happen? They say 30 years ago. I've never told anyone. So this opening, this sacred opening, gets tucked away in the dresser drawer of the mind. When our children come to us, it's an opportunity to say, wow, what a beautiful, loving experience. That may just open up to be part of your spiritual path in life. I don't need to be tremendously knowledgeable about mystical experiences. I don't need to be a great theologian. I can honor the power of what happened. Wow, how wonderful. And that says it doesn't need to go in the back dresser drawer. Okay, how much, 2 minutes? No more minutes?
Don't worry.
No more minutes? Okay, how can we support natural spirituality? First and foremost, a language, a sacred language of transcendence. Now, remember, for 66% of people, that is in our faith traditions. But not every child is surrounded by the embrace of a faith tradition. So given the hours spent saying, water bottle, table, banana, orange, we can also, in that, that grand effort, name the transcendent reality as we know it in our language. And for some people, that is a language of a faith tradition. For some people, it's a language of